All right, so um, we're diving into a bit of a mystery today.
Uh-huh.
It involves, you guessed it, a case of the yellows.
Okay.
Leaf yellows, that is.
Right.
You've brought in quite the stack of articles, forum threads,
Hmm.
even a video from a biologist named Felipe, it looks like.
Looks like you're serious about figuring out these yellow leaves.
You're serious about cracking the code on why your plant's leaves are turning yellow.
Yeah, it's a pretty common problem. Not always a simple one, though,
Right.
but luckily for you, looks like you've got some good sources here.
Yeah, and from the looks of this video, Felipe seems like he could talk about plant biology for hours.
He definitely seems passionate. And he dives into some really interesting points. One thing I will say he really seems to emphasize is the importance of making sure that any advice you're getting about plants is actually, like, backed by science.
Which is what we're here for.
Exactly.
So, where do we even begin? I see this term senescence popping up in a few of these articles.
Ah, yeah, senescence. So it's essentially just a fancy word for aging.
Okay.
Like us, plants shed old parts as they grow.
Hmm.
And for leaves, that process often involves, turning yellow.
So, some yellowing can actually be totally normal?
Exactly.
Oh, that's a relief. But how do you know when it's not normal?
Well, Felipe actually gives some pretty clear warning signs in his video. He says, if you're seeing multiple leaves yellowing at the same time, especially newer growth, that's usually a sign that something else is going on. Whereas a single yellowing leaf, especially if it's an older leaf, that's usually not a cause for panic.
That makes sense. It's like when one hair falls out in the shower versus finding clumps of it. One is no big deal. The other means it's time to call in the experts. So, if multiple leaves turning yellow is a red flag, what are some of the most common culprits we should be investigating?
Huh.
So, if multiple leaves turning yellow is a red flag, what are some of the most common culprits we should be investigating?
Well, I think it's always good to go back to the basics.
Okay.
What does a plant need to thrive?
Right.
And one of the forum threads you shared actually highlights a really common one, which is transplant shock. Sometimes it's easy to forget that plants need those fresh nutrients, proper drainage,
Mm-hmm.
both of which can be addressed with, a good repotting into a bigger pot, fresh soil.
And I see Felipe in the video really emphasizing the importance of using a high-quality substrate.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly does that mean for someone who might be newer to, the world of plants?
So substrate is just a fancy word for, like, the potting mix.
Okay.
Basically, it's all about the foundation. A good quality substrate provides the right balance of nutrients, the right structure for those roots to really thrive. Think of it like, building a house on solid ground versus building it on sand. You need that strong foundation.
So if the plant has been in the same pot for a while, the soil might be depleted of nutrients and the drainage could be compromised.
Exactly.
And that could lead to those yellowing leaves.
Exactly. Yeah. And, that actually ties into another really crucial factor that Felipe brings up, which is, don't forget to feed your plants.
Right.
Even if you're repotting regularly, plants need a consistent supply of those essential nutrients to really, be healthy and happy.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier, being wary of quick fixes, but I keep seeing this advice to just add iron to combat yellow leaves.
Right.
And Felipe seems pretty adamant that this isn't, the be-all, end-all solution. What's the deal with that? So if simply adding iron isn't the answer, what's the bigger picture Felipe's trying to get across here?
I think it really comes down to remembering that plants are complex organisms. They have these interconnected systems,
Yeah.
and just like, we can't survive on a diet of only iron supplements.
Yeah.
Plants need a balanced intake of all sorts of different nutrients to really thrive.
Okay, that makes sense. But if we're giving them, fertilizer, shouldn't that theoretically be covering all their nutritional needs?
It should in theory, but one thing that Felipe really digs into is this idea of even when we provide the right nutrients, sometimes there are other factors that come into play.
Okay.
He uses this term bioavailability.
Okay.
And it essentially refers to the plant's ability to actually absorb and utilize the nutrients that are present in the soil.
So a plant could theoretically be lacking a specific nutrient, but simply adding more of it might not actually solve the problem if there were these underlying issues preventing it from actually accessing those nutrients.
Exactly. And that's where, getting those basics right that we talked about earlier really comes into play. The quality of the substrate, proper watering techniques, even factors like temperature, believe it or not, can all influence a plant's ability to uptake nutrients effectively.
Temperature, you mean like the temperature of the room that the plant is in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He mentions that extreme temperatures, both hot and cold, can really impact a plant's ability to absorb nutrients efficiently, even if everything else is perfect.
Wow, that's something I honestly never even considered. It's amazing how much goes into keeping these plants healthy.
Right.
It really highlights how much we can learn from, you know, actually taking the time to understand the science behind, plant care and not just relying on, those like quick tips and tricks.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're well on your way to becoming quite the plant detective yourself. By, really digging into the research, understanding the why behind the advice, you can make much more informed decisions for your plants and avoid falling for some of those, those quick fix myths.
Yeah, for sure. This is a fascinating deep dive. I think I speak for both of us when I say that Felipe's passion for plants and accurate information is definitely contagious.
It certainly is. And remember, just like with any relationship, a little knowledge and attention goes a long way. And now
Right.
that you've got the tools and information, go forth and cultivate that thriving indoor jungle.
Yes, happy growing, everyone.